you will question yourself a lot. Like, you're going through the meat grinder, literally. Don't give up, and it gets easier. As I said, first year was really tough. Second year was also tough, but you were starting to understand how things work. And the last 2 years were the best, because by the time I finished my second year, I knew how the system worked. I knew what I needed to do. And so the third and final year were just amazing for me. The two of the best years I had.
Welcome back to the Fresh Engineer podcast, where fresh engineers share their stories. I'm your host and mechanical engineer Anna Reich, and in today's episode I'm talking to Abdulazeez Sheikh Rafiuddin, who's a mechanical engineer who grew up in Saudi Arabia, from where he moved to India, Dubai, and then northern Sweden, where he now works as a material flow automation engineer for the battery producer Northvolt. I used to work in the same team that he still works in, and that's how we became friends. And for this recording, he actually traveled over 600 kilometers all the way from Skellefteå in the north of Sweden to Stockholm, which I'm really glad about because you do not want to miss his story. In our conversation, we talk about his experience studying mechanical engineering in India, the problem with putting solar plants in the desert and how to solve it with engineering, the differences in working culture between Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and Sweden, and making smart career moves and using your network effectively as an engineer. I hope you enjoy. To start, could you please just give a quick introduction of yourself?
So, my name is Abdulazeez. I'm working as a material flow engineer at Northvolt, based in Skellefteå. I've been working at Northvolt for 2 years now as a material flow engineer. My background is mechanical engineering, and I have a master's in engineering management. And I've worked in Saudi Arabia, and also in Dubai, UAE, before moving to Sweden.
Yeah, nice. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start all the way at the beginning. So where are you from? Where did you grow up? And what were you like as a kid?
My parents are from India. My dad is an electrical engineer. He moved to Saudi Arabia for work, and I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. I spent most of my childhood jumping around between Saudi and India. As a kid, I was very restless, always jumping around in the house as well, playing with cars mostly. My mom always said that I'll end up doing something with cars. Loved video games, and here I am.
Here you are. So you studied mechanical engineering at, I don't know how to say it, Anna University
So Anna University. So it's in South India. It's a university in South India. Anna means big brother.
Okay.
In Tamil. So it's named after a very political revolutionary back there. So I did my bachelor's in mechanical engineering from there. 4 years. One of the best times of my life, I would say. Really intense. And engineering in India is especially very, I would say, classical mechanical engineering. There's very little emphasis on mechatronics or electronics or even programming, because I only did 1 semester of programming. Mm-hmm. But there is a lot of deep dive into statics, dynamics, thermal engineering. They love their thermal engineering. I had 4 semesters of different types of thermal engineering. I think it started with thermodynamics, heat and mass transfer, gas dynamics, jet propulsion, and all kind of stuff. So it's very classical mechanical engineering.
So you were living in Saudi Arabia and then decided to study in India, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So why did you decide to study there, and also why did you decide to study that?
The thing is, it's not easy for expatriates to enroll into universities in Saudi Arabia, and also at that time there were not many top-notch universities in Saudi. Now it's a different case, but back then it wasn't the case. So my dad decided to send me to India. And the reason why I chose mechanical engineering is, my dad was an electrical engineer, and I didn't want to be an electrical engineer. So I wanted to do something different. I was trying to explore a bit into aeronautical engineering. Also, for some reason, I was obsessed with the genetics engineering for a while. But then I realized, it's very niche. People just told me that mechanical engineering has a lot of scope and it's very wide. And some of my peers, they told me if you want to go into aeronautics, you could do mechanical engineering and then do a master's in aeronautics or something. So that's why I chose mechanical engineering.
You already talked a little bit about your experience, but what was it like to study mechanical engineering, and was it in any way different than you expected?
How to say, it wasn't, I knew it was going to be hard. because like when you come from an Indian background, you have a lot of a lot of engineers, and they actually prepare you to an extent mentally how hard it's going to be. Like you hear people talk like your cousins, my sister, she also did software engineering as well, and dad was an electrical engineer and all that stuff. So I kind of expected that it was going to be a very tough ride. And what was the other question?
Yeah, was it different than what you expected?
No, I mean, it wasn't different. I think I did expect a lot of practical exposure, like internships and stuff. The university doesn't really help you with that. You have to do it on your own. If you don't do it on your own, then you don't get any internship experience or anything. But I was lucky enough to do some really good internships. One of them was at a nuclear power plant in India, and that is something I really remember. I did that in 2015, and it was a really fun experience. And to see a nuclear power plant, and they had 2 reactor units. One was already commissioned, and the other one was under construction. So I could brag that I've been inside a nuclear reactor, but they didn't have any of the fuel rods or anything, so it was just an empty shell. But yeah, I've been inside a nuclear reactor.
Nice.
I've said that twice now. But, yeah.
Do you have any advice for how to get such an internship?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with India is that you need to have contacts. So I did it with my classmates, and one of my classmates, his cousin worked there as a technician, and he was able to get us that internship. And it's not easy because it's a nuclear power plant. There's a lot of security screening and everything. So either you have to be recommended from the very top level of the university or someone from within inside. So only then you get it. And then I remember it's the first time I came across the word NDA and everything, and we had to sign a lot of official government papers and everything regarding secrecy and all that stuff. And it is only allowed for Indian citizens as well. So
okay,
it's hard to get, and I think I'm really lucky to have a friend who knew someone in there. So yeah, it was quite a trip. I mean, multiple visits to different government agencies and all that stuff. Yeah. But it was worth it.
Did you do that in between your studies? Or?
Yes, between my 3rd and 4th year. That was really cool.
Yeah, I also really like my internships to get to see what you really need the skills for that you're learning.
Exactly, and like I watch a lot of documentaries, and when I I knew about Chernobyl and everything, and I've seen the documentaries and all that stuff. When I first entered into one of those control rooms, I was like, oh, man, nerding out here. So yeah, it was fun. Yeah, and it really helped me put things into perspective. There are certain things which I learned there, which I still remember, which is kind of amazing because I don't remember a lot from university, but those things which I did at the internship, like some of the things which they taught us about the power plant and everything, it's still with me. And that kind of made me realize how valuable it is that you do good internships at good companies. And that really helps you understand how a factory or a plant or anything works.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for high school students who are, they need to make the decision of what to study, and they aren't sure if engineering is for them, but maybe it is? How can they know?
I mean, if you're not sure, the one thing about engineering is it's really demanding. Becoming an engineer is really demanding. So for me, it was, so I don't know if I could say this, but there's a saying in India, like you're either an engineer or a doctor or a disgrace to the family. So I didn't have many choices. I didn't want to go into medicine.
Yeah.
But speaking on advice to high school, I would say do your research. Do your research. And engineering is not just mechanical, electrical, civil, software, and IT. I mean, in India, IT is also treated as a field of engineering. There's so much. It's only after I moved in, joined engineering, that I realized there is geological engineering, there's biomedical engineering, radio engineering, communications, and all this different stuff. So I would say do your research and try to explore different options and then make that decision of. And also it is very important which university you choose. So yeah, do your research. Don't limit yourself thinking like, okay, these are the only fields. There's so many engineering fields out there, especially with renewables and sustainability and everything. I think that's picking up like crazy. So yeah, do your research and pick the right university.
Why is that important?
Because as I said, right, like pick the right university in terms of their curriculum. Research on what they teach and what they emphasize on teaching. And as I said, the engineering, which I did, the 4 years of engineering, is it's very traditional. We had one chapter on CNC machines, and we had one semester of mechatronics, and that was very basic, like microcontrollers, processors, and everything. And especially moving into the industry, you realize that, okay, that mechanical engineering, that era of mechanical engineering with pure mechanics and electrical, it's gone. Now everything is part of electronics, and I think you need to research that, like what kind of curriculum they teach. And I think it's also important that no matter what kind of engineering stream you choose, it's important that you know at least some sort of basic coding and everything. Because as I said, only one semester of coding, and that was also C and C++. Yeah, and also to see how they support you with internships. And because sometimes, I mean, at least in India, as I said, you need to have some sort of reference to get into any company. So being a part of a good university helps as well.
And then if they now decided to go into engineering, what advice do you have for them? Basically, on their first day, they're just starting out. How can they make it through engineering school?
I think, as I said, it's going to be very demanding and overwhelming. I don't know how it is in Europe, but in India, you have a pressure of time. Like you need to finish it in 4 years. And there's also a lot of societal pressure and also academic pressure that you need to finish it in 4 years. I would say if it is possible, take your time. I mean, not too much time, but and don't get overwhelmed, because what I saw was like the leap from school to engineering was a very substantial. The scope, the way we were taught, the way the subjects we dealt with, the subject matter, it was different. So take a deep breath, be mentally prepared that it's going to be tough and demanding, but don't get overwhelmed and take it one day at a time. That's all I would say. Because I remember my first year, I was there were many days I was thinking like, I want to quit. But yeah, my parents really kind of supported me on that, and that really helped. What would you like? How was it? And I know I'm asking you a question.
Yeah, that's fine.
How was it in for a European university? How was it?
For me, I mean, I can only really talk about Germany. There's no time limit. At least at my university, we could study however long we want. There was no requirement of how many courses you needed to do in any semester. So there were people that, there are like just a couple, but there are some people that had been studying at the university for 15 years because they really just, they saw that as their lifestyle.
Yeah.
So that is like the extreme version.
Yeah, exactly.
That shows you just how it's really in your own hands.
Yeah. I mean, I think the university, it really prepares you in a sense on how to deal with people as well, like especially at workplace. I would always like my friends would always wonder, why do we have a professor who's a really nice professor, and then you have professors who are just not nice? And it kind of like questions you, like, why are we going through this? Like you will question yourself a lot, and it's like you're going through the meat grinder, literally. So yeah, just don't give up, and it gets easier. As I said, first year was really tough. Second year was also tough, but you were starting to understand how things work. And the last 2 years were the best, because by the time I finished my second year, I knew how the system worked. I knew what I needed to do. And so the third and final year were just amazing for me. The two of the best years I had. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a similar experience. The beginning was really tough, especially since I wasn't used to studying so much. I just, like in high school, I just kind of was winging it.
Yeah.
And studying the night before, and then it all went well.
Yeah.
And that's how I started out in university, and that was a mistake.
Okay. Yeah.
You really, I mean, I think it helps if you know it's going to be tough and you overstudy rather than understudy.
It helps to be prepared mentally.
Now you're done with your bachelor studies. What was it like? Oh my God, I cannot talk anymore. What was it like to look for your first job?
That's it. I wouldn't say it was challenging, especially when you have a dad who's an engineer. So, and who's worked for more than 30 years, right? And my dad, like when I was doing my final year of engineering, my dad had already started talking to contacts and everything. And I think a lot of people might think that, oh, okay, so did I use contacts and references and everything? I mean, some people don't like it. But I think as you grow, networking and references becomes a part of how you grow.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I was one of the lucky ones in that aspect. For me, I was able to find a job immediately in Saudi Arabia. I didn't want to continue working in India. I always wanted to go back to Saudi. And so I was able to find a job in Saudi Arabia. So it wasn't much of a challenge. I mean, of course, there was a lot of uncertainty. Will I find a job? I mean, as I was doing my mechanical engineering, as I was nearing completion, my dad was pushing me to do a master's, but I wanted to take a break from studies and get into work. And I was trying to get into aeronautics. But then I realized, like, okay, aeronautics, it's not easy if you don't have a specialization in that. So I didn't know what I was going to get into because, it was challenging in that sense. Because when I was in high school, it was always about, okay, or in school, like, okay, engineering. Okay, now I'm completing it. Okay, I kind of had a sense what I wanted to do, but I knew it was going to be hard. So there was a lot of uncertainty of where I'll end up. And then the job, my first job was something which I never thought I would be doing. But it was easy for me. But I knew a lot of friends who had a lot of difficulty in getting, because the problem is workplaces and companies, they want experienced engineers and they don't have the time or capacity to take new engineers and teach them. Depends on case by case. So I was a really lucky guy in that sense that I was able to, like, my dad was able to help me.
Yeah. And then you worked as a sales engineer, or?
My designation was technical sales engineer, but I didn't do any sales.
Really?
Yeah. So it's funny because the company which I worked for, it was also a startup. It was based in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So we sold hydraulic equipments like pumps, flanges, motors for industrial desalination power plants. So copper tubings for boilers and all this stuff. Really heavy duty stuff. And my job was, so we only had one major client, which was owned by the state in Saudi. So they would send out these RFQs, requests for quotations. And my job was to download all these RFQs, and there were thousands of RFQs, download them and study all the technical data and see if it met, like, if we have something which we would provide. And then I had to vet it. And after that, I would reach out to our suppliers based in Korea, in China, India, all over the world. We had a few collaborations with some suppliers. And then they would send us proposals. And I would review the proposals and the drawings and everything. And once the technical side of it was done, I would prepare a draft and everything, and I would forward it to our actual sales engineers. And they would draft the pricing and everything, and then they will go to the customer. So I was doing more of a back-end technical review, but they called me a technical sales engineer. The first 3-4 months were fantastic for me because I was reviewing engineering drawings and all this stuff on a large-scale basis, and I was, oh wow, this is fantastic. But after 4 or 5 months, it was the same thing. I would download the same RFQs, talk to the same suppliers, it's the same kind of equipment again and again and again. The job was not at all stressful. Like, it became boring, but not stressful at all. I mean, of course, you are part of the sales meeting and everything, where the sales team would be under a lot of pressure from the management. Why aren't we able to meet the sales quota and everything? And I'll just be sitting there. I was like, okay, yeah. It was really good in a sense that after going back home, I wasn't thinking about work, which is a luxury I miss. But after a year and a half, I was like, this could be a perfect job for retirement, but not for a starting budding engineer.
Yeah. Because
I wasn't being challenged mentally or intellectually for, like, to do stuff. I was just reviewing stuff.
So this job was in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
And then, so is that how you decided to go somewhere else and to go to Dubai?
Yeah. So I started looking elsewhere. I wasn't dreaming big or anything. Europe was never in my mind. And I was like, my dad was still saying, like, okay, maybe you should do masters or try to look for work elsewhere. It was really difficult to find job in Saudi Arabia because the government was bringing in rules where if a company wanted to hire an expatriate, they need to have at least a minimum of 5 years of experience in engineering For those who were already working in companies, it wasn't a problem. But if I had to apply for a new job, then it became a problem. So I started looking outside of Saudi, but within Gulf region. And then I came across this renewable energy company, and they wanted to hire engineers, electrical engineers. They wanted electrical engineers. So they did a lot of stuff with solar. So they did utility scale solar installation on grid, and they also did off grid as well. So off grid in the remote deserts, you had quarries and recycling plants and everything which are not connected to the grid. So this company would provide diesel generators with batteries and like connected to the solar power, the solar plants as well. So they were doing this stuff, and they wanted electrical engineers for that. And I was just randomly applying for it. And then I was called for an interview, and the hiring manager, he was from Italy, and he started asking me stuff, and I told him my electrical engineering knowledge is very basic. And then he said, like, look, I'm looking for someone who could communicate really well, because he was struggling to find engineers who could communicate efficiently with the customers. Mm-hmm. So he said, like, that's why he was saying that he was looking for sales engineers and stuff, because they can communicate and they have technical background. And then they made me an offer, and I was like, okay, time to go. But it's interesting because when I landed in Dubai and my first day at work, they told me like, okay, we might have a new assignment for you, because it was supposed to be temporary. And this company was founded by a German entrepreneur, you could say. And he was into all sorts of crazy stuff. He wanted his hands in everything, and he was always thinking ahead. One of the biggest problems of having solar plants in the middle of a desert, like people think, oh, let's put solar plants in the desert, but people don't think that there's one huge problem with having solar plants in desert is dust. Even a little bit of dust will just completely destroy the productivity of the plant. So you need to make sure that they're clean all the time. And when you have solar plants, which are 20, 30, 40 megawatts, and I know in Dubai, there is a solar park, which is like 700 megawatts. They're also building a solar plant, which is close to a gigawatt. And these are really massive. So how do you clean them? Even though manpower is cheap in the Gulf region, it's not sustainable. So they wanted to use robots to clean these solar plants. And that company was also a startup with just like 70 people or so. And so the CEO was like, okay, we need someone who could temporarily look into this robot thing. Like, we are installing these robots to clean solar plants. And that temporary thing became full-time thing. I think that was a very fortuitous move for me, because I was doing something really fancy. But the biggest challenge we faced over there was 50 degrees, and it's really humid, and having a robot with a PCB inside, and they just failed all the time. So longevity of the robots were a big problem. But it was a physically demanding job, because when you're in a solar plant, if it is 45 degrees in the middle of the solar park, it's like 55, 60 degrees, because there's a lot of heat radiating from the solar panels as well. So working in the middle of the day in 50 degrees heat with a lot of humidity, trying to troubleshoot robots. And we would get these robots. So it's a very new technology. So we would get these robots from all over the world, from China, from India, from Saudi, from Japan. And all these robots are new, like they haven't been tested in these conditions, and they would be failing all the time. And there was this one company, and that's the company I ended up working after a while. They had these robots, and they had the node. So they always call the processing unit the node. But when I was in Anywhere, the first company I was working in Dubai, they never told us like what was inside the node. So they were very secretive of it. So we always said, oh, the node. So I was thinking like, okay, some fancy computer stuff. But when I moved, I'll tell you why I moved there. But after a while, I moved to that company. And then when I moved there and they sent me to troubleshoot, they're like, okay, you can open it. Oh, finally, I'm going to see what's inside. And like I opened it, and so it was in a very fancy aluminum CNC case, looked very premium, you know. And I opened it. It was a Raspberry Pi. I'm like, oh, okay, this is not what I expected. I did that for 18 months. And then we narrowed it down to like 2 or 3 suppliers, like 2 from China and 1 from Saudi Arabia. And we were using them extensively. But this was early 2020. COVID had still not affected UAE, but financially, the company was struggling a lot. So I figured out, okay, now would be a good time to make a move, because I was hearing a lot of rumors, a big layoff is coming. And I knew I was doing something very fancy. I was doing it with another engineer, and like we both knew, like, okay, if heads are gonna roll, could be us, because we were doing something really niche. So I reached out to the Saudi-based supplier, and I told them, like, hey, like every time you need to do an installation, you're sending an engineer, right? It's costing you a lot of money. It's like, yeah. That was also a startup with only 15 people.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking to the CEO of the company. He was from Australia. It's like, yeah, it's like, why don't you hire someone locally? Yeah, we're looking into that, but we don't know anyone. It's like, well, would you consider me? It's like, really? Like, yeah, but why would you want to move? It's like, well, I'm just trying to make a move. And I think, well, of course, I didn't tell them we were doing financially bad. That would just look bad. So I had to tell. I think this is where it really becomes crucial, that you communicate. You don't lie, but you don't tell the truth as well. Yeah. So I basically told him, like, look, I'm working with different robots. I see a lot of potential with your robot, and I think I want to be a robotics engineer and everything. So I think if I dedicate myself with you guys, I think it will really help me, and I really enjoy working with you guys and stuff like that. And then they also, so I've been working with them for 18 months, and they also wanted someone, and it was a win-win situation for them. And I moved to that company February 2020. Lockdown was middle of March 2020. So I moved 6 weeks. And also after I moved there, they laid off like 20 people from my old company. So it was really good, because my manager was telling me, like, it's good that you moved. And that's one of the reasons why we didn't hold you back, because it was good for us as well financially. So it was kind of a good move. Like, the timing was perfect for me. Otherwise, I would have been in some really deep trouble. And then I started working with them, and that's when I opened it and I found a Raspberry Pi. I was like, wow.
So I'm curious, what was the difference between working in Dubai versus Saudi Arabia?
In terms of working culture, Saudi Arabia was still, I wasn't exposed to a lot of nationalities. It was still Saudis and Indians and Pakistanis. Mm-hmm. But then when I moved to Dubai, especially working in this startup, I was exposed to like people from so many different countries. Like my manager was from Italy, the founder was from Germany. I had teammates from Pakistan, Portugal. That's the first time I met people from Portugal, from Netherlands, from Austria. So it was a really multicultural environment, physically very demanding. Mm-hmm. As I said, the job in Saudi Arabia was one of the most peaceful things I'd ever done. So it's perfect for retirement, but not for a budding engineer. Yeah. But this one in Dubai, I learned a lot, not just in terms of technology and career-wise and skills, but also on how to deal with people. I think that is something very important, is like you need to have people skills. If you don't have people skills, you're going to struggle. I learned that on how to communicate with people and how to be subtle with people, because not everyone is an engineer, and especially those who have control over the finances are not engineers. So you need to learn how to convey a complex technical topic to a non-technical person and try to get them approve what you need. So yeah, in that sense, Dubai was very different than Saudi.
Were you speaking English?
English all the time. Yeah.
Also in Saudi Arabia?
Also in Saudi Arabia, okay. English all the time. And I think that's one of the reasons why my Arabic is not the best. It is something I regret. Maybe I should have put it more focus. So if any engineer is in a different country, just learn the language. It's a regret which I have. So.
And it is a downside of working at startups.
Yes. Yeah. And I think in Dubai, especially because it's dependent on foreign investment and tourism and everything, like I didn't have to use Arabic anywhere. Even the police in Dubai also, like they spoke like 3-4 different languages, because you had a lot of Asian community, and so they knew they had to know some of the local Asian languages like Hindi and Urdu, because you have a lot of people who do some of the tough jobs like laborers and truck drivers and all this stuff. So they can't speak English. So. Or Arabic, it takes time for them to learn Arabic. So yeah, it's a very cosmopolitan environment. Yeah.
What were some of the biggest challenges throughout your engineering jobs?
The one in Saudi was just boring. There was no growth, right? Because there were no KPIs for me. Like, what do I show? Like, I'm just downloading stuff, reviewing it, and giving it to. So the only KPI I had was like, I would tell my manager, I downloaded 350 RFQs these months, or I downloaded 200 RFQs, and suddenly 1 month is like, I only downloaded 50. It's like, why only 50? We only got 50 RFQs. So I think it was really boring, the first job. Dubai, even though I worked for 2 different companies, I did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was physically taxing, like so hard. Working in the heat in a solar plant, it's not easy. And you need to think technically, you get dehydrated. It's really hot. You can't sit anywhere. And these solar plants, the solar panels are usually built on metal structures.
Mm-hmm.
And like if you don't want to sit in the sand, or in some cases they have gravel, and on top of gravel they have the solar plant. And if you're not wearing proper clothes and if you sit on the metal structure, then it's going to be really, really hot. So physically demanding, a lot of politics.
Like office politics.
Office politics, yeah. It's a different kind of office politics. Yeah, that's the challenges which I've faced.
What was so challenging about those office politics?
Everyone's trying to get you fired. Well, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's cutthroat, right? Like you're trying to outdo your coworker, and they try to take credit for your job, and it's like you have to be really smart. It's not a place to be humble. If you're humble and stuff, like you will not grow, or you'll just be like sidelined. So that's what I meant by having good people skills.
Since you've done this a few times, you've moved jobs a few times.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think are some signs to look out for that it's time to move jobs?
I think the first sign is like, are you intellectually stimulated? Do you get to use your brain and your engineering knowledge? If not, and if you're starting, especially if you're a young engineer, like just starting off, and if you feel like if you're not going to grow, if you're not going to get any new challenges, then that's a sign to move on, as the job in Saudi Arabia. And the second thing is you should always be aware of how your company is doing financially. It's hard to know because companies keep it as a secret, and this is where people skills comes in. You shouldn't close yourself within your team. You need to hang out with people from other departments, especially from HR and accounts and stuff like that, because you always hear these things like how it's going. And that's what helped me be prepared to make that switch as well. So if your company's financial situations are not good, that is a telltale sign. Okay, time to get out of there. And again, if you don't see any opportunity for growth in the sense doesn't mean that you work for 6 months as an engineer, then you become a manager. No, growth in the sense of the kind of responsibilities you get. Do you get new projects? Do you get more responsibility within the project? Or are you doing the same thing for 2 years and you're not getting more responsibility? Like, what kind of example can I give? Okay, you've been given a task of designing a bolt of an engine, but then you shouldn't be doing that for the next 2 years. You should slowly progress to, designing the piston, and then the engine block and stuff. Like you need to progress within the role. That's what I mean by responsibilities, because I think we get swept away by the fact that, especially if you're working in startups, you see people becoming managers really quickly. So that's what I mean.
Why did you decide to pursue a master degree?
Oh, I forgot about that one, right? Yeah.
So that's what you did next, right?
Sorry?
That's what you did next, or even next to your work, right?
Yeah, so when I moved to Dubai, I completely forgot about this. So I moved to Dubai in 2018, and I had a close family friend there, and he's one of the smartest engineers I've ever met. He's also an electrical engineer, and he was also pushing me to get a master's. And I told him, like, okay, where am I going to get the money to do the master's? Because I had no idea how expensive it's going to be and everything. And then he said, like, look, in the UAE, they've seen that there are so many engineers who want to do masters, and a lot of European universities have opened up campuses in Dubai, especially from the UK. So England, Scotland, not many from Germany. England, Scotland, Canada, and Australia. So there are a lot of universities from here, and the universities are like the masters is catered in a way where it supports people who are working. And then I did my research and I found that all these master courses are in the evening after 6 p.m. And it's either 2 classes per week or 4 classes per week. So if it is 4 classes per week, you can finish it off in a year. If it is 2 classes per week, you could finish it off in 2 years. And then I looked at it and it was a lot of money, but still I realized that, okay, it is something which I could manage. And so I had 2 options. One was doing a master's in robotics engineering, and the other was doing a master's in engineering management. And I was really split between the two. Which one do I do? And a lot of my mentors, my peers, my managers, they all told me like, look, you're already working in robotics. So I think that's a good enough exposure for you because you're doing industrial level robotics. That's what my manager said, but it wasn't industrial level. It was more Raspberry Pi stuff. So so they all said like, you should do engineering management because that has a lot of scope. And if you're trying to move to the next step in your career, that should really help. And so I decided to do master's in engineering management from Middlesex University. So they have a campus there. That I don't know why I forgot to mention, but yeah, that was another big challenge for me. So I enrolled in 2019 for the first 1 year. So I chose the option of a 2-year course where I would have 2 classes per week, Mondays and Tuesdays. I hated Mondays and Tuesdays because you work for like 8-10 hours on the field and then you go to a class and you need to sit in a class. You have to you work for 8 hours, 10 hours into the sun, you're sweating and you're all stinky and everything. So you have to quickly go to the home or take a shower, change your clothes, go to the university and be presentable. Although I didn't manage to do that all the time, but that was another big challenge. And the reason why I wanted to do masters while I was working was that I didn't want to take a break because my dad had retired at that point of time and I didn't want to be in a situation where I wanted to take a break and stuff. So I saw this opportunity and then I took it and it was very, very difficult. I would only recommend it to someone who cannot afford to take a break from their work. If you can afford to take a break, if you're financially capable, then focus on your masters. I took the very hard route of working and doing masters. And I think COVID was a bit of a blessing in that sense because the first year was really the first year ended at around March, April 2020. That's when COVID became a thing in the UAE, in Dubai. And then classes became online.
Yeah.
I was like, perfect. The last year was really easy for me because classes became online. Even though lockdown in Dubai only lasted for 6 weeks and we started going back to offices and work, the university was taking it really cautiously and it worked out for me. I don't think I would have survived if the classes hadn't gone online.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, one more point on the master's thing is that after doing the master's, I kind of still think maybe I should have gone with the robotics thing.
Why do you think that?
It wasn't... robotics is such a vast field. So robotics is an amalgamation of mechanical, electrical, electronics, software, and math. Math is the base of this. So you do the programming and coding, and then it's a layer upon layer. And I was just looking at robotics from a mechanical and electrical side of things, right? So I always had people who would do the software side, the networking side, and I think if I'd done the master's in robotics, I would have been exposed to the other side of things as well, and that would have helped me a bit, especially with PLC programming and all that stuff. But still, engineering management is also not bad.
Yes. Can you explain a little bit what that is?
So engineering management or industrial management, it's a combination of MBA and some engineering theory. So the courses I did was project management. We learned how to use operations simulations, factory simulations, accounting, human resources. But for me, the most beneficial was project management. And in that, I got to learn all these project management methodologies like waterfall, agile, Prince2, Scrum, and all these kind of stuff. And I think that is helping me now at the workplace. It is important. Like, I'm not saying engineering management is not good, but I would say it is something maybe you do it a bit later in your career. Maybe I did it a bit too early. Maybe if you are an engineer who likes to do technical stuff, I would say do a master's in a technical degree, build upon it, and then move on to a management kind of degree. Yeah.
And then when in the timeline was your move to Sweden, and how did all of that happen?
It was 2020, early 2021 again. The company, so the third company which I moved to was also not doing great financially, because when COVID hit, every company was like, okay, we're not going to spend money on getting robots. Business was really taking a hit. We only had a few projects. And there was a point in early 2021 when our CFO, he told us that, okay, we only have enough money to pay your salaries till July 2021. It's like, I started to apply. So I wanted to move to Canada. Europe was never in my radar. But then I spoke to one of my engineering friends, and he told me like he got an offer from Norway. And that's when it struck me that, okay, I could look into Scandinavia, because Scandinavia in particular, because I got to know that, okay, if you know English, you could survive because English is widely spoken.
Yes.
So I started applying. I was obsessed with Iceland. First thing I did on LinkedIn was like robotics engineering jobs or mechanical engineering jobs in Iceland. And Iceland only has like software jobs. So I was like, okay, that's out of the question. Then Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and Denmark. And there was a lot of engineering jobs in Sweden, especially with Volvo, ABB, Scania, and all these companies. And then I came across this company called Northvolt, and they said automation engineer. And I was like, okay, I'll apply for it. I applied for it in late February. They got back to me early March, 6 rounds of interview, and then I had a job offer, and I submitted my resignation. June 2021 is when I moved here to Sweden. The previous company is still doing good, which is good because there's some really good people in that company. So for their sake, so they pulled out of Dubai and they're just focusing on Saudi, but they're doing really good.
Right. So they did not go under.
No. They didn't go under in July, but I did move in June, and I think it was a good move. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was it like to move to Sweden?
So it was the first time I set foot in Europe. Very scared, very nervous, didn't know what to expect. But I was like, yeah, I'll just move. The first 1 month I was in Stockholm. It was really nice. I came during midsummer.
That's great.
A lot of sunlight. Northvolt was just starting to peak or shoot upwards. The first few months were challenging, especially because you're away from family, new culture, new way of working, and new way of dealing with people as well. So it took me some time to get used to all of this.
What was the biggest difference between working in Dubai and in Saudi Arabia and working in Sweden?
There's just so many things running in my head right now.
Yeah, you can take a minute.
Yeah. I mean, even though Dubai was very cosmopolitan, as I said, it's really cutthroat. People are always trying to stab you in the back and stuff. I mean, it happens in every company, right? Even Northvolt, like it happens in everybody. But it's very subtle over here. And there's a lot of emphasis on having a work-life balance in Sweden, I would say, even though it's a bit of a different story at Northvolt. But I do see that in Northvolt. In my previous companies in Dubai and in Saudi, well, Saudi was a different case, but in Dubai especially, salaries would not be paid on time. I know some of my colleagues, they didn't get their salaries paid for like 7-8 months. There are no unions, so you have no protection from the unions and stuff like that. And I think when I moved to Sweden, I found out that there's this social security system. Like it's like in Dubai, you could be fired easily for no particular reason. So that kind of reassurance was really, really nice to know that you wouldn't just be kicked out of the company unless it's really bad. And also the way you deal with people. I come from an environment where you're to the point. If someone does something, you tell them if it is either right or wrong. There's no sugarcoating.
Yeah.
There is no beating around the bush. You just tell them. That's how, like, I learned when I did a mistake, I would get it straight from my peers and from my managers. And I was doing the same as well. Like, there was no holding back, because at the end of the day, you need to get a job done. But then in Sweden, it's very different. You have to be very diplomatic. You have to be very careful of how you phrase your wordings. You cannot be direct in your face. You need to be very careful on how you phrase it. And I think that was a huge challenge in the beginning, because I saw a lot of things which were weird, especially at a startup like Northvolt. And of course, six weeks of paid vacation.
Yeah.
I mean, in Dubai and in Saudi Arabia, you get 20 days, which is like 4 weeks. So the extra 2 weeks were yay.
So now you work as a material flow automation engineer at Northvolt.
Yeah.
Can you explain, first of all, what that is, what you do?
Yeah. If you Google material flow automation engineer, you will not find anything on the internet. You will find pages for automation engineer or material science engineers. So basically, material flow automation engineer is a very fancy word for internal logistics industrialization engineer. So what we do, or what you and I used to do, is that we would optimize the flow of material from one process area to another in the quickest and most efficient way as possible. Not only are we responsible for mapping the flow, we are also responsible for the equipment which takes the material from point A to point B. So for example, conveyors, 6-axis robots, gantries, ASRS, AGVs. What I mean by saying responsible is that we are responsible in making sure that our suppliers deliver the equipment which we want, which would help us to meet the lean production goals which we have. Yeah, that's what we do as a material flow automation engineer.
Yeah, and can you paint a bit of a picture what it looks like when you work? Where do you work? What are you wearing? What does your day look like?
Yeah, so when I moved to Sweden, I worked in Stockholm for a month before I moved to Skellefteå. That's where we are constructing the battery manufacturing factory, the cell manufacturing factory. Skellefteå is like 150 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle, so it's in the Laplands. Really cold during the winters, really nice during the summers, long days, but summer lasts for like 6 weeks, and it snows a lot.
Which you like snow?
I do like snow. Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah, like the first time I saw snow, I was just blown away. But yeah. And yeah, so I work in the factory. It's a big factory, and there are different shop floor blocks, and the area which I work in is known as the formation and aging area. And what I wear is usually, well, the standard, because it's a construction site. So we have to wear our PPEs like steel-toed boots, high-vis jackets, and a helmet or hard hat. So
then what does your day look like?
So it's a typical day. So on a normal work week, right? You start your day at 8:30. So you're on the shop floor at 8:30. We start off by having meetings on discussing what the agenda for the day is. Then we start talking with our suppliers, and then there's a lot of walking around the factory and to see where the progress in terms of commissioning, installation, commissioning of the equipment which we are responsible for. So we are all responsible for a certain type of equipment, and then we need to make sure that the supplier is able to deliver on time and everything. So it's a mix of having meetings and doing on-site stuff. You don't do hands-on stuff. Like you don't do any coding, you don't do any programming or stuff. It's more about talking to your suppliers and making sure that the suppliers are doing their job, and we validate that. If they're doing that properly or not. So it's a lot of project management, a lot of meetings, a lot of on-site activities, supervision and everything. And then usually at around 5:30, you go back and life, I guess. Yeah, so that's like a typical, but there are certain days or weeks where, so you're ramping up the factory at different stages, right? So when we are going from one stage to another, our team has to be there. I wouldn't say 24/7, but we'll have to spend way more than 8 hours. So usually we do that in shifts. So we agree, okay, there's a new ramp up coming up, so we need to split ourselves in shifts. So in that case, sometimes we will have to do evening shifts from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. or from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. But those are rare. They happen like once in 2 months or 3 months. So yeah.
What is your favorite part of your job and your least favorite?
Favorite part of my job is to finally see an equipment which I was responsible for commissioning coming to life and doing and working as it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
That is the favorite part, is to see the ASRS or the 6-axis robot, or right now I'm working on AGVs. When you see it moving and do stuff, it really gives you a lot of happiness. But I don't like, I would say, the lack of structure and organization. Well, we are a new company, so we're getting there. We have a lot of engineers working on bringing in a lot of structure and everything, but that is something which can get a bit tedious.
What is one big misconception about your job or your industry that a lot of people get wrong?
About my job? My title says automation engineer, so they think I do a lot of PLC. So that is a big misconception. So as I said, I'm more of an industrial engineer.
Yeah.
And internal logistics. So that's what we do. So that's the misconception. Regarding the industry, I don't know, to be honest, what kind of a misconception? What would you say?
For the battery industry.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people coming to me like, oh, now why aren't you doing like solid state batteries or whatever new technology just comes up? And I think a lot of people don't understand that the battery industry has a lot longer development cycles than that. From discovering a technology to actually getting it ready for mass production.
Yeah.
To actually industrialize a certain technology that
it
takes years, can take a decade. And so just because something has been done in the lab does not mean that you can actually mass produce it on a large scale. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one way to put it. Yeah. That's a good one.
Okay.
Definitely.
Glad. And what advice would you give someone looking for their first job in your industry, so in the battery production industry?
If you're a fresh engineer, I think it's really easy to get in, I would say.
Why is that?
I think they're looking for a lot of engineers, and it's hard to get in engineers into this particular field. I would talk from a Northvolt perspective, because I don't know how it is elsewhere. Attracting engineers to the Laplands is a massive challenge. You either have to be crazy like me, who likes to move different countries for jobs, or you're a young and budding engineer. I think if you have the right mentality, you'll be able to get in. But yeah, as I said, you need to have that mentality of working in a very relatively new industry. I mean, batteries have been existing for decades, but I don't think it's been done in this scale. So yeah, and I think like for experienced engineers, if you have worked in renewable energy sectors like wind or energy storage or solar, like in my case, and also in oil and gas, we have a lot of colleagues in Northvolt from oil and gas. So energy sector in general, if you worked in that sector, I think it's also easy to come in and work. And of course, batteries, chemical background, like process engineering and stuff like that also helps.
And even in the food industry, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Food industry, because there's a lot of similarities when it comes to the preparation of the active materials and everything, on how you sterilize the equipment, how to maintain clean and dry rooms and all that stuff.
How do you think that you're a better engineer now than when you start working, I think 7 years ago?
Yeah.
So what are you doing differently now?
I think I'm much more measured in my actions and reactions. Before, I would react immediately. I would say rash in certain cases. Of course, my managers, they're like, okay, we really like that you're, taking the initiative, but sometimes you need to twice. So I think right now, and I wouldn't say I've been doing it for a long time. I think I started to get better. I mean, there's still a long way to go to improve myself, started to get better, especially after moving to Sweden, where you need to think. I mean, of course, not take your sweet time, but you need to think, okay, what would happen? What would be the outcome before you decide to do something? So you need to be very measured. Basically, approach a problem as an engineer should approach. You need to take into consideration the pros and cons and how it'll turn out to be, how it'll affect the surroundings and everything. So yeah, I think that is something which I do differently, and also how I deal with people as well at work.
And privately, do you think that becoming an engineer has impacted the way you do things, maybe what you pay attention to, or some way of thinking about things?
My dad, he's a career engineer, right? So he would do a lot of stuff like an engineer at work, and that would drive us crazy. Like, for example, we're 2 blocks away from our home, and he'll turn off the air conditioning in the car. I don't know why he did that. He would always say like, oh, it's better because everything will cool down a bit or something. He worked in a power plant, in the desalination power plant. So yeah, and stuff like that. And that would drive my mom crazy. When you get into engineering, yes, you start seeing things differently. But I've decided, okay, try not to apply engineering at setting up the temperature for air conditioning or stuff like that. Okay, so keep it simple. Yeah, exactly. Keeping it simple. Yeah. I don't know, but there's something which, talking of ACs, like my dad would also get really technical in setting temperatures for the air conditionings, especially like in the Middle East, air conditionings are the norm. Like every household, every bedroom has an AC. So he would always be like, okay, I'll set it at 24, but Dad, it's like 45 outside. Keep it at 18. No, 24. He will talk about air circulation. Like, I just want it to be cold.
Yeah. And what are your career goals going forward? Where do you see yourself in, let's say, 5 years?
I think I gave up thinking about that because when I started off in Saudi, I had no idea that I'll be in Sweden, in close to the Arctic Circle, working in a cell manufacturing company. It's always good to have goals. I always knew that I wanted to do a master's when I started working, and I always knew that I wanted to do something technical. Aeronautics was a distant dream, but then I realized that, okay, sometimes you need to be practical. I mean, for me right now, my current goal is to grow in this. 5 years is a long time. So for me, it's the next 2 years at least, and then reassess myself. Because when I joined Northvolt 2 years ago, I was saying to myself, I'll take it on a yearly basis. And right now I say, okay, 2 years are done. Okay, let's see another 2 years where it goes. So I could be in the battery industry, or I could, because I'm doing industrialization. Industrialization is applicable to any factory building.
Yeah.
Right. If you're trying to build a factory, you need to know the basics of industrialization. So I could move to a different sector. I mean, that's just me. I mean, it's always good to have a plan and a goal. I mean, the fact that I wanted to do a master's and get into a technical side of things worked in a way. But yeah, I would say keep things simple.
So then I would love to end with some rapid fire questions. So this will be quick questions, and quick answers are encouraged. But if you need time, then just do that. Yeah, so first question. What is your favorite part of life in Sweden?
Snow.
No, okay.
Northern Lights.
Yeah, and since you like to game, what is your favorite game?
Right now it's Hogwarts Legacy, but I also love playing Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your favorite book?
Harry Potter.
And if you had to totally abandon your current engineering career and do something entirely
airline pilot.
You would be an airline pilot? Okay. Even after watching Air Crash Investigation?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we wouldn't want to emerge out of a crashed wreck with aviators.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it's been super great to have you on. I'm still really excited. It's been really great.
Yeah, even for me, it's the first time I'm being interviewed, apart from all the interviews I did for jobs. But yeah, it was really different experience, and thank you for having me as well.
Yeah, thank you. And so for anyone watching this who wants to connect with you after, ask you some questions, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, so
yeah, we'll link that
in the description.
Yeah. So Abdulazeez, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for listening, and
bye.
Bye.
Perfect. That was nice.
What a great conversation. I loved learning about the challenges of operating a solar plant in the desert, because I never thought about sand potentially blocking the panels. There's always so much more to an industry that meets the eye. So thank you again, Abdulazeez Sheikh Rafiuddin, for coming onto the show and sharing your story. You can find the show notes for this episode on freshengineer.io/podcast/5, including links to everything we talked about today. Next week, I'm going to do something a little bit different, because I'm not going to have a guest. Instead, I'm going to talk about my journey into engineering and my own answers to some of the questions I usually like to ask my guests. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts so you don't miss it. And here's already a sneak peek. And the final piece of advice would be to not overthink it and just accept that since you have no real insight into what it's going to be like, the best way to find out is to just try it. Make your best guess as to what you're going to enjoy studying, and then just start it, just try it out. And worst case, you need to switch after half a year or a year and probably have a much better understanding of what you then want to do. I mean, what's the alternative, right? If you don't know for sure what you want to do, then the alternative is to do nothing. So it's always better to do something to then figure it out. Thanks for tuning in to the Fresh Engineer podcast, where fresh engineers share their stories.